everyone, this is Gabrielle Whittings. In this presentation, I will be doing an analysis of the final scene of Kate Chopin's The Awakening. Titled Rebirth and Death, I take a deep dive into Chopin's illustration of Edna's sensuous relationship with the sea and desire for liberation that ultimately motivates her to reclaim control of her destiny by committing suicide. Follow along as I explore Chopin's use of romanticism, naturalism, symbolism, and religious illusion to express the overarching theme of freedom.
But when she was there beside the sea, absolutely alone, she cast the unpleasant, pricking garments from her, and for the first time in her life she stood naked in the open air, at the mercy of the sun, the breeze that beat upon her, and the waves that invited her. How strange and awful it seemed to stand naked under the sky! How delicious! She felt like some new-born creature, opening its eyes in a familiar world that it had never known. The foamy wavelets curled up to her white feet, and coiled like serpents about her ankles. She walked out. The water was chill, but she walked on. The water was deep, but she lifted her white body and reached out with a long, sweeping stroke. The touch of the sea is sensuous, enfolding the body in its soft, close embrace. She went on and on. She remembered the night she swam far out, and recalled the terror that seized her at the fear of being unable to regain the shore. She did not look back now, but went on and on, thinking of the blue-grass meadow that she had traversed when a little child, believing that it had no beginning and no end. Her arms and legs were growing tired. She thought of Léonce and the children. They were a part of her life, but they need not have thought that they could possess her, body and soul.
Romanticism is a 19th century literary movement that emphasizes individuality, emotion, and nature. Chopin employs elements of literary romanticism throughout the novel, but never as great as Chopin's romantic illustration of such a morbid moment as Edna's death. Edna's intention to come to the sea and take her own life is a last-ditch effort to reclaim the individuality she had lost to the conflict between her gender and her individual desire. In going through with this decision, Edna is able to make peace with her emotions and give in to her desires for control over her ultimate destiny. Chopin compares Edna's emotions surrounding her newfound freedom when she is naked under the sky to an illustration of a newborn creature. Chopin also highlights the sensations Edna experiences in this moment, depicting a cool depth as her body meets the water. Chopin's depiction of Edna's relationship with the sky, the sun, and the sea, all while in her most natural state, are conducive to the nature-centralized elements of Romanticism. Naturalism in literature is often concerned with how we as humans are shaped by and react to the environment in which we live. As mentioned in the prior slide, up until this point, Edna has been battling between the expectations of her gender to be a mother and a wife, and her desires for herself to have individuality, autonomy, and freedom of expression. This conflict has brought her forth to the sea with the intention to take her own life. In this scene, as she casts the unpleasant pricking garments from her, she bears in all her nakedness an unapologetic form of her natural self. Her clothes are representative of the societal mold she was expected to conform to, this moment being the first ever in which she has bared her naked body to the light of day. This scene is representative of her enmeshment with the natural world around her. The delicious feeling she experiences is expressive of Edna's ultimate bliss as she forgets the constructs of society and gives into her instincts. The beginning of the 19th century ushered in a second Great Awakening, which was a religious revival amongst American society. The Southern society of which Edna inhabits would have been greatly influenced by religious teachings and moral codes upheld by the church of the time. Throughout the novel, Edna's relationship with the church and religion does not seem as strong of a conviction as it was for her peers. Edna feels oppressed by and disconnected from organized religion. She moves further and further away from religious teachings as she commits adultery, ignores her biblical place as a woman, wife, and mother, and inevitably takes her own life. In the final scene of the novel, Chopin writes that the foamy wavelets curled up to Edna's white feet and coiled like serpents around her ankles. Expanded upon in the succeeding slide, the sea is representative of sensuality and sexuality. Alluding to the motion of the wavelets like that of a serpent is a religious allusion to Satan as he leads Edna to the sea to fall victim to her temptations of that sensuality and sexuality, inevitably sealing her fate in death. The symbolism of the sea takes on a variety of representations in this final scene alone. The sea is represented as sensuous and sexual in nature. Chopin describes the touch of the sea as sensuous, unfolding the body in its soft, close embrace. Edna, taking to the sea bare-bodied, unclothed, is an example of the freedom the sea extends to her to give into her sexual nature. The sea is also a spiritual experience for Edna. When she enters the water, there is something baptismal about it for her, cleansing her of the grief she had felt over the course of her life on land, absolving her of the many sins she had committed. The sea, having no beginning and no end, feels very godlike in its expanse. For Edna, the expanse and surface and depth of the sea represents a great unknown. She is desperate for an escape from the shackles of her gender expectations. Her swimming out further into open water both terrifies her, but also entices her to give way to her many temptations. Edna's venture into the sea with the intention to commit suicide ultimately expresses an overarching theme of freedom. As the sea represents an opportunity to escape, Edna's ultimate need for it stems from her desire to control the fate of her own destiny. There is a rebirth and death for her doing so. For so long she was a mother and a wife, the kids and her husband possessing her body and soul. She had been in a battle between the conflict of her gender expectations and her individual desire. Taking her life into her own hands is an opportunity to relinquish her suppressed individual desires. These individual desires rest in a variety of freedoms: her plucking the garments from her skin to free her body from the shackles of an oppressive society, her freedom to give into her sexual and sensual nature, an opportunity to shed her past and reclaim control of the future. Her freedom can only be attained by means of suicide. Death will set her free. Perhaps this greater theme alludes to Chopin's broader criticisms of society, suggesting that there are inherent consequences a woman must endure if she wishes to seek out her freedom and independence. Now that I have reached the conclusion of my presentation, I would like to leave my audience to reflect upon and consider two very important discussion questions. 1. It is implied that Edna commits suicide at the end of Chopin's novel, but it is up for literary debate the possibility of her venture out to sea being not a literal death, but a figurative one. Considering the symbolism of the sea and religious allusions of the waves, had Edna not died a watery death, what could this alternative ending allude to in the figurative sense? 2. Kate Chopin employs the motif of nature throughout her novel. This is explored through the symbolism of birds or Edna's affection for the sea. At the end of the novel, Edna strips herself free from her garments, basks in the sun, and lets the waves curl upon her toes. It is a very sensual display where Chopin seems to merge the personal nature of Edna with that of the natural world around her. Considering the religiosity and morality of the Victorian era with the poignant suicide of Edna, could Chopin be implying the consequences of giving into the natural self against the expectations of religious and gender-specified morality? Furthermore, is nature the mortal enemy of socially defined morality?